I must have absolute silence. Excelsior! Oh.
Stan Lee, the publisher of Marvel Comics, has probably been in the comic book business longer than anybody on Earth. He claims that Guinness is going to put him in the book of records, but that's not really true, is it?
Well, they very well might. You know, as I had mentioned earlier, I think that I've probably written more stories that have been published than anybody who's ever lived.
I was about 17 and a half years old. I heard that this publishing company was looking for an assistant. And I didn't know that this had anything to do with comics. I just knocked on the door and I said, anybody want an assistant? And they walked me into this little room with two men named Joe Simon and Jack Kirby. And they were turning out the comics for the company, and they said they need help. After a little while, they needed some editing. There was some dialogue bits that they didn't think were good. And they said, hey, Stan, can you rewrite these? So I rewrote them. And after another little while, I was ending up writing stories for them.
Hey everybody, it's Charlie. You guys may have seen this morning that Stan Lee passed away at the age of 95, so I wanted to make a video memorializing him. There's no figure in comics that's quite so great. There'll never be anyone like him again that's had such a great impact on the comic book industry. He'd been working in comics almost continuously for his entire life. Even though not all of it was at Marvel, he became the public face of Marvel during the 70s. That's when you start to see him stomping around Hollywood in the early beginnings of what became Marvel Studios many, many years later. Kevin Feige had a really nice post where he said, no one has had more of an impact on my career and everything that we do at Marvel Studios than Stan Lee. Stan leaves an extraordinary legacy that will outlive us all. Our thoughts are with his daughter, his family, and his millions of fans. Thank you, Stan. Excelsior. For those of you that don't know about Excelsior, if you're wondering why that was his catchphrase and why he said it so much, this is the quote that he gave about it. I used to have a lot of expressions that I would end my comic book columns with. Hang loose. Face front true believers. Nuff said, and I found that the competition was always imitating them and using them, mostly talking about DC Comics tongue-in-cheek. So I said, I'm going to get one expression that they're never going to know what it means, and they won't know how to spell it. And that's where Excelsior came from, and they never did take up on it, thank goodness. So he was saying that he was trying to come up with a catchphrase that nobody would be able to copy because it was so utterly specific to him as a person. Also kind of funny to hear him take a dig at DC Comics during that, like trying to do something that they won't be able to copy at the other big publishers. Most people know him from his comic book work. As a child, my first introduction to him was actually through the Spider-Man animated series in the 90s when he started to appear in more and more cameos.
And I said to Jack, what if his skin turns green?
Excuse me, I'm looking for some guy named Stan Lee.
What? Spider-Man? Pam, hold my calls for a while. I think I've finally gone crazy.
That was the beginnings of what would become like the most prolific cameo actor in the history of comic book movies and movies in general. I think he's done over 65 cameos at this point. I'll talk about some of my favorites in a second. This other quote from Kevin Feige also does a really good job of explaining his relationship with Marvel, especially in the later years when he'd become more of a mythic figure and Marvel Studios had blown up and become the biggest comic book studio in the world. He says, Stan has always been very gracious with all of us at Marvel Studios and very encouraging. Despite his persona on stage, Stan was very humble. He was not the type to come in and tell us how to be, but he encouraged us to follow his lead. Take Black Panther. We would talk about the importance of the movie and what a brave thing it was for Walt Disney Studios to spend this kind of money on a film like this. But look at what Stan Lee and Jack Kirby did in the 1960s with the character, creating him at the center of the civil rights movement. So you have to remember that all the accomplishments that Marvel have made today, Stan Lee, Jack Kirby, Steve Ditko on the Spider-Man character, they all did that stuff decades and decades ago. A lot of the people who worked with him talk about his incredible work ethic. He was actually a child of the Depression. He grew up and lived through that. So he was always driven to look for new work, even where none existed. Even when he was just working on regular comics, he was always busy doing something. That's why you see him in his later years, in his 70s, 80s, in 90s, obviously the last couple of years, still being super active on the comic book circuit. But you may not know that Marvel's early start in Hollywood during the 60s, 70s, and 80s is largely due to Stan Lee's efforts. After he rose to the role of publisher and became more the public face of the company, he started stomping around Hollywood trying to get them to adapt their comic book characters Most of the early success that he had was in getting TV shows greenlit, particularly animated TV shows. Spider-Man, there was a show called The Marvel Superheroes, which is, I think, their first genuine TV show that aired as brief segments during the Electric Company TV show. So it's like The Simpsons getting their start as shorts during the Tracy Ullman TV show. Their first real big live-action hit under Stan Lee was that live-action Incredible Hulk series during the early 80s. So naturally, his first cameo was during that Incredible Hulk series. It was 1989 as a jury member during an episode called The Trial of the Incredible Hulk.
Answer the question! David, you must answer the question!
His first movie cameo came many years later as the hot dog vendor on the beach during that first X-Men film. I still think that my favorite Stan Lee cameo is probably from Guardians of the Galaxy 2 as the Agent of the Watchers, just because, he has 65 plus cameos. This one cameo canonizes all the others as him being the same character.
Oh, man. Anyway, before I was so rudely interrupted, at that time, I was a Federal Express man. Hey, fellas. Hey, wait, where are you going? Hey, you were supposed to be my lift home. How'll I get out of here? Hey, gee, I've got so many more stories to tell. Guys, gee.
Fine, right? The bartenders are all like, yeah, crazy stupid fine.
Give it up for Chastity. Are you Tony Stank?
Yes, this is Tony Stank.
What's the matter with you kids? You never seen a spaceship before? You know, I guess one person can make a difference. Enough said.
So Lord of the Rings style, one cameo to rule them all. For those of you that are asking, he already filmed cameos for the upcoming 3 Marvel movies, for Captain Marvel, for Avengers 4, and Spider-Man Far From Home. We don't know what the cameos are going to be, we just know that he's already done them. Let me know in the comments though, what's your favorite memory of him, and what's your favorite Stan Lee cameo? We can only imagine if his Avengers 4 cameo is going to blow all the others out of the water. Marvel will probably end up adding special tags at the end of the next couple of movies memorializing him, and then in future movies after that, finding cool ways to include Easter eggs and put him in the movies without actually putting him in the movies. What I'm also hoping is that when they drop the Avengers 4 trailer later this year, they'll have a special little tag at the end memorializing him, just in honor of Stan Lee. You can click here for another Stan Lee cameo video that I did where he talks about his favorite cameo and there's a big supercut. And click here for my new Toy Story 4 trailer video. Thank you so much for everything, Stan Lee. You had an amazing life, and we will miss you dearly.